I want to say I hope you're doing well. I also want to thank you for joining me on today's episode of the Words of Life brought to you by the Pleasant View Church of Christ. In Hebrews chapter 12, starting in verse 1, the writer says, "Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us." Verse 2 says, "Looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God." So the Hebrew writer is, of course, writing to Hebrews. That's why the previous chapters have been discussing great men and great examples of faith for the Hebrews, likes of Moses, of course, Abraham, all of those men like that. And the writer says, since we're surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, those people, of course, prominent figures in society for the Jews, great examples to them. Since tracing your lineage was so important to them, it's no wonder why the writer brings this up. That's why the book of Matthew starts off with a lineage all the way to Jesus. It's so that Jesus could trace his legitimacy and say, all right, this is who I'm from, this is what family I'm from. And again, that is very important to the Jews. All right, so the Hebrew writer says, since we're surrounded by so many of these great people, who again were very, very important to them, he says, let us run the race that's set before us with endurance. He says, let us run it well. Of course, we have to remember he's writing to Christians, but they were Jewish Christians, a large majority of them. And he says, you have these great examples. He says, you know they're there. You're surrounded by them. So run that race with endurance. He says, run it with endurance, the race that is set before us. Verse 2, looking to Jesus, or how are you going to run it with endurance? Verse 2 explains that. Looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the cross, despising the shame, is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. That's the example that we need to follow, as the writer would say, as we run this race. So the Christian life is illustrated in multiple ways. Paul talks about it as a fight. He says, I have fought the good fight. Right here, the Hebrew writer says, run the race. We see that example time and time again. We see it also sometimes as building a building, building a home, building a temple, whatever it might be. We see that illustration. But here we see running. And how are we supposed to run something good with endurance? We need to make sure that we're keeping pace with what we're doing. All right, that's the idea here. So living the right way. And the interesting thing about races, as with a Christian's life, is that if you're not in the race, you have no chance to win. But if you are in the race, then you need to run it well. I want to thank you so very much for watching.